Hi, my name is Elizabeth McPherson, and this is a presentation about FERPA, what you'll need to know. So let's first look at what does FERPA stand for. FERPA stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So really the main points of FERPA are one, that it applies to families. So FERPA has guidelines for what parents' rights are, but also has guidelines in terms of what the rights for children are, if they're under 18, and especially when they hit the age of 18, what they are allowed to have access to. Educational refers to the fact that FERPA is part of what public schools and charter schools have to abide by for privacy laws. It also, FERPA speaks to some of the regulations in terms of school records, directory information, and things that are pertinent to education systems. Rights and privacies outline that this is a document, this is a statute that will outline what is important for people to understand about their rights with their data and their privacy. And then the act part kind of just signifies that this is a important federal mandate. It is kind of in writing, it is legal, it is legally binding. So those kind of all together describe what FERPA is. So here's what FERPA actually says. It says school districts must maintain confidentiality of all personally identifiable information in education records related to students. So in the reading, it indicated that personally identifiable meant that you could identify exactly who the person was without reasonable doubt. So things like names, date of birth, all that kind of stuff that would identify exactly who you are without kind of a doubt. So really the key point in that is that schools can't share student data without parent consent. So FERPA really helps us kind of cover our corners in terms of who gets what, when they get it, and who has a say in who gets it. So this information includes emails, student files, personnel information. So just kind of covers that data and information realm of who are we giving access to this information. So why is FERPA important in education? So education is obviously in the name of FERPA, but looking at some of kind of the history of where we've been. In September of 2019, at least 10 school districts were reporting ransomware attacks, which is basically attacks on their information and their digital kind of infrastructure. So the US Department of Education reports that they actually believe hundreds of educational data breaches occur every year. So in this 1 month, we had about 10, but they're really estimating that hundreds and hundreds of schools, universities, colleges, K-12 schools, are experiencing this breach of data. So people getting information either illegally, maybe through data sharing, whatever it might be. There's an increase in digital record keeping in schools, including full names, dates, and home addresses. So we kind of, especially in this kind of COVID-19 season, but in general, we're understanding the shift that schools are taking towards more online and digital learning. There's a higher than ever enrollment in online courses. A lot of our kids take advanced courses via online. We're adding apps and websites and resources and curriculum into our school districts. Almost every curriculum our schools have now has an online component. And a lot of those require usernames, accounts. Parents might sign up for an independent account at home. This is all collecting data on our children and on our families. And then there were changes in FERPA that have made it easier for schools to exchange student data in exchange for products. So some companies that were mentioned are things like Google, Facebook, Microsoft. So when you agree to some of the things at school with directory information or technology policies, things like that, your students' data might be part of something that is legally able for schools to share, maybe in return for services. I think we're seeing this kind of a lot right now too with COVID-19. There's so many free subscriptions and things that people can sign up for, and it's just, I think we click that I agree box and we're not really sure of what we're agreeing to because it's long. I'm guilty of it too. It's like, yeah, sure, okay, legal jargon, but we're potentially agreeing to share the data of our student, our child, or our family with these companies. And nearly 120 student privacy laws have been put in effect over 40 states since 2013. So really this is becoming a nationwide issue. We're seeing the need for this privacy, for these laws to be a little bit maybe more close and tight knit in terms of being really clear as to what we're doing with student privacy. So the law does provide a few things. So the FERPA law gives the right for parents and adult age students to inspect and receive a copy of their student records. It allows the right to deny access to someone else getting access to your record, specifically outside the school system. So yes, exceptions do apply, but overall FERPA gives you the right to say, no, someone cannot have this information of mine. It gives you the right to opt out of military recruitment and opt out of disclosure of students' directory information. So you should be able to contact your school. You should be able to say that you do not want your child's information placed in the directory. That directory is often where that information is getting traded and received. So the FERPA law also provides a process for errors to be corrected. This may include a hearing and for there to be complaints if there's issues. Usually those are handled by the family compliance officers of the U.S. Department of Education. So the law does not give individuals the right to sue the school. Only the U.S. Department of Education can sanction schools that have violated FERPA. So doesn't kind of give you all of a sudden this right to sue everybody, so to speak. And the FERPA law doesn't necessarily dictate how we're doing the safeguarding of records. So there's no like, you have to do it this way. FERPA just says you do need to have some policies in place to safeguard educational records. How exactly that's done is not mandated. So we also here look at educational records. So educational records are a big part of that data that we're having at school. So records directly related to a student that are maintained by the school or maintained by a third-party vendor on behalf of the school. So those constitute school records. Anything maintained by school or a third-party vendor on behalf of the school. So this is like surveillance video was a big one that they talked about, is that would technically be a third-party vendor that's maintaining information on students, obviously surveillance videos. So education records would include things like your immunization and health records, any disciplinary records, student progress reports, academic or physical testing results, GPAs, attendance records, things like that. Your education records do not include private records a teacher makes during teaching. So this might be notes that a teacher takes, lesson plans, maybe some side notes on a student, like, April 10th was a rough day, things like that. Law enforcement or campus security records, employment records, or alumni records. So directory information is another kind of big piece to the FERPA puzzle. So here's what the sources said about directory information. Any information contained in a student's education record that would not generally be considered harmful or invasion of privacy if disclosed. The disclosure of appropriately designated directory information under certain conditions is one exception, not FERPA's general written consent requirement. A school or district may disclose directory information without the parent or eligible student's written consent. So here is what directory information could include: your name, height and weight, date and place of birth, your grade, your attendance, maybe your photo, your school photo, that's part of your school file. If you're participating on a sports team, things like that. So if you are consenting to have your students' information in the directory, they may give that out without written consent. So again, this might be something where you need to let your school district know if you do or do not want your student's name or photo basically available for the public. So there are some laws about audio and visual recording. So the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution prohibits public schools from conducting unreasonable searches. So in kind of looking at audio and visual, an unreasonable search would be where you would expect privacy. So installing cameras in areas where individuals have low expectation of privacy, such as hallways, stairwells, or courtyards. Things like bathrooms and locker rooms are not allowed to have cameras, again, because these are areas we would expect privacy. The Fourth Amendment kind of protects your privacy in those areas, but cameras are able to be put in places where we would deem kind of public areas. The Federal Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986 prohibits the intentional interception of any oral communication except where one party to the conversation has consented to the record. So kind of in human speech, what this means is you can't videotape conversations without people knowing that you're doing it. That's illegal. So districts considering audio surveillance must post clear signage. So kind of one way that I've seen this work, when I taught in Florida at a public school, we had several video cameras and none of them contained audio. So whenever we had kind of a student discipline issue and tapes had to be kind of investigated, it could never be proven what was said because, again, because of this audio kind of regulation, is you cannot be collecting audio of people without their awareness. Now, yes, there could have been ample signs posted everywhere, but I think to comply with the law and to simplify things, I think a lot of schools do not contain audio on their video surveillance. FERPA requires schools to protect confidentiality of student education records. So things like images of students captured on a surveillance record qualify as education records when photo or video is directly related to a student and maintained by the education institution. So again, we have to be really careful about who's in the video, who's seeing the videos, what records they're getting put in. So companies providing services such as surveillance cameras in schools must abide by the same laws a school does when complying with student protection of data. So if we hire a company to do our surveillance, they are also legally obligated to follow FERPA. So what about our resource officers? There was a lot of conversation in the articles regarding illegal immigrants or students maybe in the United States illegally. So SROs are not required to report undocumented students. If they have authority to perform immigration enforcement, schools are considered a sensitive location and agents are to refrain from enforcement actions unless extraordinary circumstances are involved, which includes public safety. So the kind of knowledge behind SROs is that since schools are considered sensitive locations, unless they believe there is a threat to safety, a threat to student safety, school safety, community safety, they are not to enforce immigration policies as a student resource officer. So are there some exemptions to FERPA? The Department of Homeland Security and ICE may be permitted to have access to a student record in order to monitor the stay of international students in compliance with a student exchange program and visitor information system program with lawful court order or subpoena. So in other words, there are some protocols that maybe would require some information about a student to be collected or given, but that only is going to come through a lawful court order or subpoena. So school districts may disclose student information when in compliance with a judicial order or lawful subpoena, in connection with a health or safety emergency, or connected with student engaged crime of violence or a sex offense. So again, this kind of does show that the exemption to sharing student data would basically take legal action or a health or safety emergency. So we have to believe that there is a credible threat to a student, to the community, or we might have to have legal kind of authority to do so. So what happens if we're not in compliance? So it's easy for schools to try to comply with FERPA, but maybe making small mistakes violating the policy. So it's the small details that matter when it comes to student privacy. So again, we all have probably clicked I accept on FERPA when we get a new job or go back to school. We probably sign the FERPA sheet, not even thinking twice. But it's just the little things we need to think about to make sure that we're in compliance with privacy laws. So one of the things is to make sure you shred student documents. I am definitely guilty of just throwing a sheet of paper in the garbage, kind of not thinking twice, maybe folding it in half, ripping it once, maybe if that. But we need to make sure that anything that has student records on them needs to be shredded. Schools need to make sure they're choosing compliant vendors to make sure that they are going to comply with privacy laws as well. And we need to require teachers to use discretion when verbally sharing sensitive student information. So, as we talk to people in school, out of school about what's happening, we are obligated to abide by privacy laws, even when we talk verbally about students. So Erie County, where Junction City Middle School is, states this in their school board policy. So the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, the district policy states that the district may disclose appropriate designated directory information unless you notify the district in writing by August 15th or no later than 10 days after enrollment. If notification is not received, pictures of your child may be posted in the building and USD 475 websites. So this goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier about directory information. So this is kind of in the policy in the handbook that parents are signing, understanding that unless they go to the school and ask otherwise, their students' information will be listed in the directory. So how do we increase school compliance? So the first thing is raise FERPA awareness. Just make sure, again, we're kind of like signing on those lines really quick, especially as staff. There's like a million things to agree to every year, but making sure that staff really understands FERPA compliance. Confirming when FERPA applies to you. So when are you in situations where you need to really ensure that you're understanding FERPA regulations? Know the rights, protections, and exceptions in the law. Choose compliant vendors, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Train school employees. So don't just shove a piece of paper, tell them to read it and sign it. Really go through maybe a presentation like this and make sure they understand FERPA. Implement compliant policies and procedures. So as administrators, we need to make sure that we're not only training the employees, but making sure that they're doing it. Encrypt files and emails. So this is probably more towards the technology department of the school district, but just make sure that there's always that safety in whatever documentation you're putting online. And implement any other prevention tools, maybe compliance monitoring, case management software, anything that you can do to kind of just give another layer of protection with online data. So how can we support our families and students and parents as they know their rights? So we're going to encourage families to read the materials we send home, all of it, every line. Look for the information regarding student data and make sure that you comply with it. Don't sign the sheet if you don't agree with something it says. Question the information that needs to be shared and ask for copies of legal mandates that are sharing information. So it's okay. We want our parents to be asking as many questions as they have. This is their child. This is their private information, and we want them to feel confident that we're handling it well. Be sure to know what's in the school directory and request an opt-out form if you wish for your child's name, address, phone number, date of birth, all that kind of stuff to not be listed. So we need to make sure parents understand, like I just showed in that slide, with Geary County, it will be in there unless they opt out. So they need to make sure they do that. Encourage parents to ask for a copy of school district policies and review them. Continually ask if there was an update. If you know there was an update, get a copy of it. Go on the website, whatever it might be. Teach your children to be critical. If they're given a survey on a website or an app pops up and says, oh, take 5 minutes of your time, like encourage them to ask the questions about how necessary some of that information gathering is. And make sure children understand that if there is a breach in confidentiality, that they should kind of let a parent know, and that parents should be carefully reviewing student record data. So how are we as a school and staff going to comply with FERPA and be more compliant with what FERPA tells us we need to do? So we need to be careful. Be careful with the technology offered in the classroom. Again, signing up for these accounts and doing all these cool technological things is really awesome, but it is just allowing more and more information for our students and our school to be put online. Keep data secure. Always make sure that your student data is secure and that it's following the school policies for keeping records. And respond to parents carefully when they're asking for information. Make sure that you're talking to legal parents and guardians. I have a student in my classroom who has an educational advocate due to her position in foster care. And so I need to make sure that I'm talking to the education advocate about some of her school record stuff and not necessarily her foster mom. Her foster mom does have a lot of privileges in terms of student information, but her educational advocate always has to be my first call. So hopefully you understand a little bit more about FERPA, understand how as a school we're going to use it, and how we can encourage our parents to also know and understand their rights.